Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 22 of the Convo podcast. It is entitled Between Mountains and a Hard Place, Pakistan, examining Pakistan's policy on Afghanistan. The news headlines that rolled out of Afghanistan over the last few weeks, and that indeed continues to roll out of Afghanistan in anticipation of what the new government will look like, has piqued the curiosity of analysts, of Muslims and non-Muslims, analyst and layperson alike. We look on with great interest, with great anticipation as to what will happen, what will transpire in Afghanistan after the resurgence and the rise of the Taliban. On this episode, having looked at the issues to do with Afghanistan and Taliban in our last episode, we turn our attention to the wider region. And of course, where better to look than to the east of Afghanistan, to a regional power known better as Pakistan. Pakistan, of course, is an important player in the region. It is one that has had a significant influence over the years on the outcomes in Afghanistan. And so, of course, many have looked at Pakistan and have tried to analyze the events, the statements, the political positions or posturing, whatever you'd like to consider it, again, also with very keen interest. Inshallah, on this episode, we have some very esteemed and very honorable guests who have agreed to join us, whom we will introduce very shortly. But first, a quick segment to explain what this episode is about.
I mean, just look at Afghanistan. It's almost now 19 years. Still finding a solution. Still trying to get peace talks going, ceasefire going. Still people are dying in Afghanistan. Does the US want another conflict? What is happening in Afghanistan is over 2 decades of conflict, deep divisions, and unfortunately, the United States seeking a military solution when there was not one. When there were 150,000 troops, NATO troops in Afghanistan, the greatest military machine, that was the time to ask the Taliban to come on the table. Why were the Taliban going to compromise when the exit date was given? And there were only a few thousand American troops left. Why would they listen to us when they are sensing victory?
And the argument up until now has been, we've got war republic, we can't really put troops on the ground, we can't really get involved.
Well, this is where peace will be made, war will be made. At the moment, the way things are in Afghanistan, not everyone is optimistic.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome back on the other side of that video. So, as Sufyan mentioned, we do have 2 esteemed guests with us today who inshallah will make the conversation very interesting, very enlightening. And so I'll introduce who they are. We have Brother Hashmat Muslih. He is a political analyst and a commentator on all things Afghanistan. He's got an MA in International Urban Environmental Management, and he served as an advisor to the former president of Afghanistan, Burhanuddin Rabbani. Assalamu alaikum and jazakallah khair, Brother Muslih, for coming on.
Wa alaikum assalam.
And we've got Brother Adnan Khan, who is a political analyst, author, activist, and founder of the website Geopolity.com, shameless plug, written on economics, political Islam, energy, defense, and the Middle East for over 20 long years. Not to suggest that you're advanced in years or anything at all. author of Global Trends for the 21st Century and 100 Years of the Middle East. Brother Adnan Khan, Jazakallah khair for coming on today. You seem to be muted or audio is not connected.
You hear me now?
Yep. Yeah, much better. Jazakallah khair.
Okay, yes, it's good to be here.
So thank you very much, brothers, for agreeing to come on today. Now, we did, with our last podcast, we covered the issue of Afghanistan as well, but we did in quite a broad sense because the news was quite fresh. It was moving very quickly, and so we thought it's a good idea to sort of get on top of it, have some discussion about it. But as Sufyan said, we wanted to narrow the focus a bit now to sort of some of the regional implications, but also another player in this arena who is Pakistan. But we have to consider whether Pakistan is acting as Pakistan or a conduit for someone else or any of these other possible machinations. So before we get into the nuts and bolts of it, though, I guess we can ask generally, what are your thoughts on sort of the movement of the Taliban, the sudden emergence, and sort of how things are at the moment, and then we can proceed the discussion from there. Brother Hashmat, perhaps you can start us off.
So, assalamu alaikum to you and all the listeners. I really like the topic of this discussion, which is Afghanistan, which is between the mountains and a hard place. It's very ambiguous in a sense, and I like the ambiguity of it. That is it Afghanistan that is between the mountain and a hard place, or is it Pakistan that is between the mountains and a hard place? And I think it goes both ways. And the relationship of the two countries historically, since the creation of Pakistan and 1948 till now, has always been shaped in the two nations' image of themselves. And I think to date, that policy and that relationship has not found its a coherent place in both countries' foreign policies. Pakistan would like to see Afghanistan as a junior brother for various reasons. And Afghanistan looks at Pakistan as a junior brother for its historical, social, and political reasons. And that relationship has been at loggerhead at times, and the two nations have never had an active war as such, but there has always been conflict between the two countries at various levels. And I think that has come now to basically fruition, and we can see that how Pakistan appears to have had the upper hand in how it's going to shape a government in Afghanistan that will be an alliance to Pakistan. Is it going to be an alliance of equals or an alliance of a leader and the led? With that, I'll start this conversation and pass it on to you and see what other colleagues have views on this.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much. Brother Adnan, what would you like to start us off with on this topic?
Okay. So welcome to you all and all your listeners. So I think at a broad level, America's credibility is really taking a hit. This 20-year adventure, for many Americans, they're looking at this and thinking, what have we actually achieved over a 20-year period? I think since the 15th of August, when Kabul fell, really America's credibility has taken a big hit. We can discuss probably, was this a smart thing to do? Was it not the smart thing to do? But US credibility is really taken a hit. And this seems to be the perspective that's coming out of Pakistan at the moment. So Imran Khan has said, the whole adventure in Afghanistan was a disaster for America. We told you so. It would always turn out like this. Pakistan, if I remember, it used two key arguments over the last 20 years. One was from Musharraf that really we've got no choice. We have to side with America. Otherwise, it's going to have a massive impact on us. And then later on, they developed and pushed out this double game strategy, that we're playing a double game. Really, there is a long-term plan here. We are backing the Taliban, although we're fighting with and alongside America. And from Pakistan or from the military establishment, they feel they've been vindicated. They feel that that strategy has now delivered. America is leaving the country with its tail between his legs, and the Taliban are now back in power. The third argument that they put out, or the perspective that they've always put out, was that they've always viewed Afghanistan from this strategic depth perspective, that we don't want to be encircled by India. And obviously the 2001 invasion led to the overthrow of the Taliban. A Northern Alliance related regime was put in power. And you saw over the last 20 years, India open up consulates, India getting involved in Afghanistan. So as far as the Pakistan military is concerned and its establishment, all of that now has been reversed. I mean, Pakistan's back in the game as far as they're concerned. So all the narratives they created as far as they're concerned have actually transpired now. Interestingly, since 15th of August, there's been not much from the military establishment, even though they've been heavily involved, in the talks that were going on. What you've seen really is the civilian politicians try to take credit for what's actually happened. So you've seen Adnan Khan, who, to be honest with you, for a long time has taken the perspective that America's involvement is a bad thing. It's only causing instability in the region, including Pakistan. You've seen other civilian politicians take credit that Pakistan is really back in the game again, and the developments of the last 20 years were against Pakistan's interests. So that's the general perspective really that's coming out from there. And yeah, it'll be good to lead on from there, inshallah.
Some very interesting thoughts there about Pakistan, about Imran Khan, and there's a million directions we can take that in. You know, just off the top of my head, I'd love to investigate and get your thoughts on how much of a say Imran Khan has in the direction that Pakistan will take, which gets to the heart of, you know, IR theory in some respects, you know, the politician to lead as the poster boy of Pakistan, or is he actually representing what the top brass of military leadership believes? There's so much there to talk about, but I think I want to start off by talking about how significant do you think Pakistan is as a regional player? We've got in Afghanistan, if you look at the borders, it's as famously, you know, probably every publication of Afghanistan will start off by saying it's a landlocked country. It's got Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Iran, but, you know, perhaps one of the most important, it is claimed, partners and neighbors and countries which border Afghanistan is Pakistan. So I just want to get your thoughts on the significance of Pakistan in the events of late in Afghanistan and how significant a player it is. Hashmat, if you can just comment on that to start off.
Well, yes. So I don't agree that Pakistan is back in the game. I would reframe it differently. I would say Pakistan was never out of the game. Pakistan has been in the game from the get-go. They did play a very successful double game in Afghanistan. And I'm sure that a lot of the regional intelligence organizations are very envious of ISI and the role it played in Afghanistan. Let's look at Abdul Salam Daif, the Taliban ambassador in Pakistan, when he said, and I've met him and I've spoken to him a couple of times, he said that while he was the recognized ambassador of Taliban in Pakistan, one day the authorities came to him and said, "Your Excellency, you're no longer Excellency." And he was arrested and handed over to the Americans. I personally worked for Al Jazeera and went inside Afghanistan in 2001, 2, 3, 4, and then later on in 6 and 2011. And I was the journalist who basically managed to get the early footage of Taliban coming back to fight the Americans. And the Taliban, I've always said, were displaced. They were never defeated. They simply vanished back into their villages, and their leadership went into Pakistan, into safe houses. During that time when I spoke to Taliban, there were a number of Taliban commanders who were very angry at Pakistan's double game, because they were saying that a lot of the leadership has been arrested and has been put under house arrest. So Pakistan did play, especially Pakistan's intelligence services, played that double game. Today, they're just reaping the rewards of that game. But there's a wider question here. Did America really, or is America really defeated? Yes, America is defeated militarily. They could not, let me rephrase that. America came to Afghanistan to arrest, kill Osama bin Laden. The moment they couldn't do that, they had to find a theory to stay in Afghanistan. And that theory became nation building. But to nation building, to sell it to the Western taxpayers, they had to sort of ideologize that, put another
The
ideology.
liberating mission and saving the Afghan women, all that kind of thing.
Absolutely. So the card of women was played, that we want to liberate women, emancipate women. And you can see now the coverage has gone back, most of the media back to their focusing on women and what's happening to women and individuals. So with that over policy, the Americans tried to go construct a theory of why they have to stay in Afghanistan. But the moment they killed Osama bin Laden, America did not have a reason why they have to stay in Afghanistan. If you look at the wider picture of the region, of the Muslim world, the West has never transferred technology to the Muslim world, never. And that's been one of the major issues. You have Southeast Asian countries that they've got technology transfer. That's because there is a war at an ideological level. All Muslim countries are told you have to give up your Islam, you have to liberalize in order for you to have development. But when it comes to non-Muslim countries, technology has been transferred. So the Americans, militarily, after they killed Osama bin Laden, their mission was accomplished. The rest of it was in a strategy of how to get out. And I absolutely believe that Osama bin Laden was handed over to the Americans in exchange for Afghanistan by ISI of Pakistan. I remember many times Asadullah Durrani, the former head of Pakistan's intelligence, came to Doha and spoke in Brooklyn Institute, and he was running this one line. It's not befitting for an empire or an emperor to walk in the streets of the empire and try to keep security. You have regional allies. Give that to your regional allies. They know the streets and the alleyways better than you do. And that's what the Pakistani intelligence services wanted from the Americans. And the Americans are happy to hand over that to the Pakistanis for various reasons that we may get time to discuss why the Americans would want Pakistan to handle the case of Afghanistan. So I believe that the real game or the real war on Taliban is going to start from now. It's going to be a diplomatic war, an economic war, and it's going to be a public relation war with the might of the Western media against the Taliban.
Ahmed, can I ask you? There's the public record for why America goes to Afghanistan, and it talks about capturing Osama bin Laden, and it talks about nation building and everything else that keeps evolving over the period of 20 years. Then there's, very, very well documented reasons that go well beyond that, which talks about, the ability to reach warmer waters and connect pipelines from Central Asia through Afghanistan and reap the benefit of that. I can't remember the names of these companies which established, but all the way back in the 80s and 90s, there's communication between Taliban leaders and these companies during the Reagan administration. I just want to get your thoughts on when we say that America did achieve certain objectives. You say militarily they may not have won, but they've achieved certain other objectives. Where do you see these objectives and how successfully America has met these particular objectives?
That's a very good point you raised, and that comes the narrative from inside Afghanistan. The narrative in Afghanistan is that in modern day, if you look at the Arab Spring, there was a war against the Islamic Brotherhood or the Muslim Brotherhood, making sure that they never come to power, and wherever they came to power, they were crushed. But that war is actually started in Afghanistan when the Mujahideen captured Kabul from Najibullah, the communist president. And those who came to power was Burhanuddin Rabbani, Ahmad Shah Massoud, Ustad Sayyaf. All these people have ideological roots in Muslim Brotherhood that many countries in the region did not want that. And I know this, I've heard this personally from Ahmad Shah Massoud, that they used to send weapons to Sudan in exchange for sugar and other supplies from Sudan. And at one point, CIA had mentioned to Ahmad Shah Massoud that you guys had barely taken control of Afghanistan and you were exporting weapons to Muslim Brotherhood countries like that of Sudan, which was under Bashir. So an alternative to the Muslim Brotherhood in Afghanistan was a tribal traditional movement, one like that of Taliban to secure Afghanistan, pacify it, disarm the country, and also have an inward-looking Islamic view. They found that in the ideology of the schools of Deoband, especially that of Afghanistan. So the Americans, the British, the Saudis, and the Emiratis, and the Pakistan government at that time saw Taliban as the right horse to back, or even to create and mobilize to get rid of that ideological government had it came to power fully and established itself, which they thought was dangerous. At that time, Iran did not want a Sunni Muslim Brotherhood government on its border as well. Yep. So yes, we do know that the Taliban had very close links with the Americans in their first coming in the 1994. Hamid Karzai was actually one of the very key figures in making sure that the Taliban are recognized by the Americans. He was actually lobbying with the petroleum companies that they make deals with Taliban. At that time, the geopolitics was that the situation was changing. Soviet Union was collapsing. There was a lot of uncertainty. There was a thirst for energy, and there was a lot of oil and gas pipelines that had to go through this region from Turkmenistan into Afghanistan into warm waters, as you mentioned before, or could have gone through former Soviet states of Georgia and Azerbaijan, and then going through Turkey. Because really, if you look at all the gas oil pipelines that going to Europe, either through Turkey or Ukraine, and Europe wants to somehow have an alternative avenue to these energies. And the Persian Gulf, which is heavily militarized by the Americans, was the safest way. And with Pakistan being a former ally of America during the Cold War, a very, very key ally of America. So they managed to convince the Americans that this was the right path to go. So I would say in terms of energy and all the bigger geopolitics, America hasn't lost anything. What derailed the project was that when the Taliban captured Afghanistan, they inherited Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda bases. So that factor within the Taliban was a double-edged sword. From one hand, it legitimized the Taliban in the sense that they've got all these Arabs who speak Arabic and they are very religious and they are calling for jihad, and they would go to villages and invite people to join the Taliban ranks and bring supplies and weapons. And it was a great cover also for the Pakistan ISI to say, look, it's not me, it is these Arabs who are pushing the agenda, not us. And the mistake that the Northern Alliance, that we call Northern Alliance, made, that they publicized the angle of Al-Qaeda bigger than that of the angle of Pakistan's interference in Afghanistan. Well, at times it was almost equal rivaling, and it created confusion in the mind of the world. Is it really Pakistan supporting Taliban, or is it Al-Qaeda supporting Taliban? And that was really good for the Pakistani ISI to say, look, it's not us, it is Al-Qaeda. The Al-Qaeda factor derailed everything for the Americans. But now with Al-Qaeda out, the Taliban cleansed in some way, and now Pakistan as a guarantor is going to keep the cap and make sure that the Taliban do not go down that path of making alliances with some of these organizations that have a global agenda, political and military agenda to establish Islamic State or Khilafah. The Taliban are back in the game, the Americans are back in the game, but how the Americans are going to write this off, and within the years to come, they're going to develop new relationship with the Taliban and use their economic, diplomatic ties and pressures through Pakistan and directly on Taliban to bring about reforms. Look how they've got a stronghold on Iran, on Chauvis. And Pakistan would like that pressure, because as the Taliban government remains isolated internationally, it's good for Pakistan, because Pakistan becomes the only avenue for Taliban to engage with the rest of the world. And that's where the influence will come in, both economically, politically.
Jazakallah khair. Adnan Khan, I'd like to bring you in at this point. Hashmat spoke about figures from the 80s and 90s who are, in some way or form, they're still there. Not necessarily themselves. In some cases, there were assassinations. In some cases, some of them were passed on. He mentioned Burhanuddin Rabbani, Ahmad Shah Massoud. The latter of them, Ahmad Shah Massoud, was, from what we've heard and what we've read over the years, he was one of the three gentlemen at the time it was probably a 16, 17-year-old young boy who, at the time when he was known as the Lion of Panjshir, when he went across to Pakistan to be trained by the ISI. I want to ask you a little bit about the difference that you see in Pakistan's influence on those sorts of military outcomes and political outcomes today, compared to what we had full-blown training of people that were then going to be sent back to determine the outcome. How do you compare the two eras?
Mm-hmm. So obviously the biggest factor back in the 80s was the Soviet invasion. And what you find is the anti-Soviet forces were on the same page. The Soviet Union had to be stopped, had to be defeated. So with American financing and American leadership, with Saudi financing and Saudi organization of mujahideen from across the world, and with Pakistani training, financing, organization across the border, really Pakistan had quite, in fact, the rumor was is General Zia, he got an agreement from the Americans that on the ground, Pakistan wants a free hand. It doesn't want any interference. It was going to organize the mujahideen. It was going to train them across the border and send them in. And to a large degree, that did actually take place. In fact, America really only got involved on the ground later on in the war, and it was quite clear the tide had turned. So what will turn into the Taliban, you had the Hizb Islami, all the different groups that even emerged within Pakistan later. You know, Pakistan knows who these individual groups are. It trained them, it financed them. That was then. Now, obviously, situation's a bit different. Some of these mujahideen have turned against Pakistan. Some of them joined the TTP, Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, inside the country. And it's interesting, Hashmat mentioned Mullah Abdur Rahim Zaif. So I've actually just starting his book because it's been translated, and it's quite an interesting insight. But he actually says something very interesting, that he himself said he never trusted Pakistan. He knew Pakistan were financing the Taliban, but he himself never trusted them. Right, and I think he probably referring
for the benefit of our audience, could you just give us a little bit more about this personality? Just give us a little lowdown on who he is.
So Abdurrahim Zaif was the Taliban ambassador to Pakistan. So a lot of the times the public statements they were putting out, the press conferences were by him inside Pakistan. So his book was in Pashto. I think it's only recent. Well, it's been translated just recently. And in there, he talks about the beginning of the Taliban. He talks about himself when he was the ambassador. And it is quite interesting because he saw Pakistan, the ISI, how they were working internally within Pakistan. So it's actually a very interesting insight. And he himself, he said this for a little while, the Taliban, well, he himself didn't really trust Pakistan fully because he could see their relationship with America. So he obviously saw this during the invasion by the Soviet Union and afterwards when he was an ambassador. But what he says is, look, the Taliban had no choice. They needed a foreign patron. They actually had no choice. And then he talks a lot about the Kuwait Shura. He talks about the meetings that took place in Pakistan with the presence of the ISI. So it's interesting. He had this view, how much can we really trust Pakistan? And in some ways, he felt vindicated when, General Musharraf sided with America against the Taliban. So obviously the situation we got now is some of these figures have obviously gone. And what you actually have now is you've got this Taliban organization, and Pakistan doesn't have influence across the whole board. And this is why interesting is there's been some interesting statements about Mullah Omar's son, Mullah Muhammad Yaqub. It would seem Pakistan's not happy. They probably don't have the relationship they would like. You've obviously got the Sirajuddin Haqqani. That's really the link Pakistan had inside the Taliban. And they sit on the leadership committee. This was one segment of the Mujahideen, Pakistan back in the day. So definitely Pakistan has influence. Does it have the amount of influence it would like? Absolutely not. And that's why it's interesting. A number of these personalities now who are taking a lead for the Taliban, they were in prison just a few years ago within inside Pakistan. The Mullah Brother, he was in prison. In fact, he was released to go and lead these talks in Doha. So this, some of this comes back to Pakistan's double game. That's what they call it. I think if you sit back and you look at it, what this double game really is we're going to back both sides and see which way the coin falls. Right. And I think Abdul Rahim Zaif, he saw this, that really Pakistan's in it for themselves. They're not necessarily
political expediency 101.
Yeah. So obviously the way the Pakistani military has put this is, oh, don't worry if loads of our mujahideen that we backed are passing away. Don't worry if things are really bad. In the long run, this investment will pay off. Right. And obviously, not, that's not going to sit well with anyone. That's not to say this is a position of everyone within the military establishment. The Pakistani public support the Taliban. They believe they're in a legitimate struggle against a foreign occupation. In fact, even within the army, this has been a view, and that's why many of them were court-martialed. And when many of these individuals were told to carry out operation in Pakistan's northern areas to make sure these people don't support the resistance, there were a lot of court-martials. So what it shows you is that there's a lot of opposition against this double game policy as well. But what's being pushed in Pakistan now is the double game has paid off. Taliban are back in power, and we told you so. That's how they actually...
well, I guess it was always a 50-50 chance it went one way or the other. Either if it didn't go in your favor, we're still playing the game. If it does go in your favor, see, we told you so.
Yeah. So what's interesting here is if you look, Pakistan's been doing the heavy lifting in Afghanistan during the Cold War now. It's been doing the heavy lifting for a long time. So there's a question there, what's the end game? What's your long-term goal? Because it seems whenever America needs Pakistan to do something, it gets done. You had the Cold War, you had the Soviet invasion, but a lot of the heavy lifting is being done by Pakistan. So how much of this are you doing for yourself? How much are you doing this for your brothers in arms, as you keep saying? Or how much of this is actually in US interests? And that's probably a discussion we should have as well, actually.
Absolutely. I think that's very interesting. I think, did you want to add anything to that, Hashmat?
Yes, I like to unpack this idea of double game. Majority of the people that would listen to such comments, especially if they are Muslim and very religious, they will be appalled that how could a Muslim state, play a double game? Pakistan played a double game. There are nations who are playing multiple games, triple games. That's what the role of intelligence is. The world of politics is not a world of you're my brother, I am your brother, and that's it. It's not that. There are major issues at stake. Let's just look at this. Why would Pakistan want to have an influence on Afghanistan at a wider level? Pakistan has been bitten in half. You've got Bangladesh separated from Pakistan. So they have got this psychological scar on this nation. The nation was built on the idea that it's going to be a pure, Pak nation of Islam. And then it still has the issue of Jammu and Kashmir with India, has a huge neighbor called India with enormous alliances globally and enormous economy and rising as a military power and a nuclear power. Then you've got on the other side, you've got Israel, which is a nuclear power threatening the Arab world. The Muslim countries, none of them have an army that can sustain itself. Pakistan has managed or had no choice but to go down the path of nuclear armament and has armed itself with a nuclear weapon. It's one of those states that is narrow, hasn't got a strategic depth. It is long ways. It is in a very difficult situation in a sense that its boundaries are challenged. Its legitimacy and historical legitimacy is challenged. Remember, Afghanistan government did not support the creation of Pakistan, unfortunately, in those early days. And when I say unfortunately, I'm talking politically unfortunately. Religiously is another issue. Should the Muslims of India be partitioned? That's another issue. With all these problems, Pakistan has a burgeoning population and a small landmass and a large population of Pashtuns that Pakistan would like to have them exported into Afghanistan. I would not be surprised if suddenly a war breaks out in Pakistan tribal areas and 5-6 million Pashtun become refugees inside Afghanistan. And that will be an exiting a population into Afghanistan and reducing Pakistan's population mass. So with all this in mind, Pakistan does not want to have Indian influence in Afghanistan. To win over Afghanistan, Pakistan chose the Pashtun population of Afghanistan. Now, everybody thinks the Pashtuns of Afghanistan are a majority. There has never been a census in the history of Afghanistan that which ethnic group or which tribe is bigger than the other tribe. In Afghanistan, the view of the Tajiks, which is one of the predominant or major ethnic groups, is that at best we are neck to neck, like 39, 38, 38, or 40, 40. Yeah. But the Pashtuns keep on saying we are 70% of the country. And with that, whether that's true or not, we leave that, because all we can say that the Pashtuns in Afghanistan are a major minority. In 1992, I'm just going to enter into another dynamic, internal dynamic of Afghanistan, why Afghanistan became dependent to Pakistan. Apart from geography and military and all that, as Adnan mentioned, that the Pakistanis decided to back various groups, but the Pashtuns of Afghanistan, they need a foreign ally. They need someone from outside of their borders to support them. Because remember, Afghanistan, at the height of its development, had only 5% of its population educated. The Franco lingo of Afghanistan has always been Farsi, which is the language of the Tajiks, not only the language of Iran. It originated in this region of modern-day Afghanistan. So, and imagine, and just to take you back, 19th century is the age of nation states and the fever of nationalism. So nation states are created in the image of a single tribe. Like in UK, it's the British. And then Welsh and Irish had to accept. In France, it was the Francos that had to sort of everybody has to speak French. And you can see still the skirmishes in Europe between different linguistic minorities and groups because of that idea of nation state and the idea of a melting pot that emerged in America. So in Afghanistan, the Pashtun nationalists wanted an Afghanistan that is in the image of Pashtuns, a Pashtun polar nation. But then they had a problem of language. The main language is Persian. And then in 1992, the people who came to power is Burhanuddin Rabbani, Ahmad Shah Massoud, predominantly, these are the leaders of the Tajiks. So the Pashtuns felt that they've lost Afghanistan. They had to make a deal, even if it had to be with the devil. But then they found, not the devil, they found Pakistan, and which is an ally in the region that has a strong Islamic parties and a strong interest in Afghanistan. So I believe that the Pashtun leadership was very pragmatic and very focused in what they want. They don't care who's going to help them as long as they can get that first seat back in their hand. I was in the north during 1990 when Qanuni, the chief negotiator of Northern Alliance, this was before Ahmad Shah Massoud was assassinated. He told me, we have come to conclusion that the war in Afghanistan will end if we allow the first person to be the Pashtun, a Pashtun. In other words, let's bring back a Pashtun leader at the top as a president or king or Amir al-Mu'mineen, no matter what form that comes. And then we can move and just stop this bloody war that cost hundreds of thousands of people's lives were lost during this war, and the entire wealth of the nation has been destroyed. So with that image, with that explanation, Pakistan has very important geopolitical reasons to play multiple games to maintain that. And when I mentioned Israel, now Pakistan is a nuclear umbrella safeguarding the eastern flank of the Muslim world from any future war from India. I'm not saying India is going to war with the region, but when you discuss geopolitics, these are the issues you have to discuss.
Interesting.
And with that power comes also economic clout that Pakistan can have. I mean, right now, sorry, just very quickly, right now, if Americans don't like something, they fix it by force. They can fix it by force conventionally because they've got a nuclear weapon. If you break those lines, then the bigger guns will come out. So everything ties back. International politics is survival of the fittest. It's not brotherhood.
Absolutely. I know we, from a realist point of view, the state will always look after its own interests. And I've heard, we'll listen to other podcasts. I was just telling Brother Adnan before we started the podcast, I was listening to an Urdu language podcast, who obviously are very interested. This is frontline conversation in Pakistan at the moment in many circles. And they made the same point that, a state will always look after its own interest. Obviously, I hope when we make that point, we're differentiating between the reality and obviously the expectation or the Islamic requirement. They're two separate games here. We say when you talk about the reality of the Pakistani state, 100%, it's going to be a purely realist state in that nation, in that notion of looking after its own interests, looking after its geopolitical interests, and playing the double game in that respect should not come as a surprise to any of us.
Can I say something here? This is exactly where ISIS comes in.
Yeah.
ISIS will go to those other groups and tell them, because of modern nation state and because of all this, with double games are played and Muslim nations are fighting Muslim nations, that we have to break down boundaries and there has to be one brotherhood. Absolutely. And that's why they are. This is their argument.
Absolutely.
That it's inherent in the nature of modern nation state to be selfish against another state, and hence civil wars and hence proxy wars.
Definitely. I want to ask Adnan if you can comment on this, and Hashmat, your thoughts as well. We spoke about the various layers within Pakistan. Like you mentioned this phrase, top brass, the top brass of Pakistan's military. Then you talk about these the segments within the Pakistani military which were court-martialed. Then you talk about the public within Pakistan supporting the Taliban. There's so many different layers here. I really want you to just break it apart for us a little bit, because the last thing anyone should walk away with is this thought that Pakistan is one monolithic entity and everyone's on the same page, right? Can you give us some of those layers? I've mentioned 3. Are there others? And can you give us a little bit about each of those?
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I think the important thing here is whenever we look at any nation, usually there's a clear hierarchy. You've got the people, you've got some political parties, you've got some industrialists, you've got the military if there are involved, and then you have the regime and the institutions that have quite a dominance over people's lives. Pakistan's not like that, and it's due to one reason. When Pakistan was created, much of the resources ended up in India main. So from that point onwards, really, Pakistan started off with a weak hand. So even the 1 year Muhammad Ali Jinnah was in power, what you find, they had many people who migrated, they have a lack of resources. In fact, the early politicians from the All India Muslim League actually turned out to be pretty incompetent. And that was the only institution that was organized was the military, because a lot of these were trained under the British. They were very, very organized. So the military, I think, did a coup in 1956-58, because that's how bad things were. So really what Pakistan evolved into is a strong society built around kinship and family, but a weak state. In fact, for most Pakistanis, the state has absolutely no influence on a day-to-day level in their lives. In fact, nobody even takes it serious. So when you have a problem, when you have an issue, you go to the tribal leader, you go to an influential, you do not go to the state, you do not go to court. So that's why Pakistan has evolved very differently compared to a normal country or country that actually functions. So the army is the guarantor of Pakistan. In the army, you have the top brass. Obviously, not every position is the same. And just to give you some numbers, you have, I think, 4 or 5 4-star generals at the highest level. Underneath them, you have about 20-ish lieutenant generals. Then you have about 300 major generals, and then you have a few hundred brigadiers. This is the top part of the army. Pakistan has an army, well, a standing force of over 500,000. We're not even including the reserve force. So that's quite a unique position to actually be in. The military of Pakistan live technically in separate areas, very different to the rest of the country. So they're in a very, very unique position. So that's why the army top brass, the ISI, these are the real rulers of Pakistan, whether they're in physical power or whether you have a civilian government. Beyond that, then you have your feudal landlords, you've got your families, you've got your opportunists, and then you've got some political parties that have come to represent the interest of certain factions. So you've got the Awami League that represents the interest of a certain faction, things like that. And because the civilian government has done such a bad job, you've got all these different parties, opportunities that have evolved over time. Obviously, the view in Pakistan is Pakistan was created for one purpose, which was for Islam. We lived with majority Hindu population, and as far as most people are concerned, the sacrifices they made was for Islam, and they expect Islam to be some form of Islamic state that does project some sort of Islamic power around the world. That's why over the years, the establishment, the military top brass, have had to come up with arguments. We're weak, America's too strong, we've got no choice, double game. That's actually what they've done. And that's why you find General Musharraf, when he joined America's war in terror, opposition against him grew. That's why this term Musharraf came back. In fact, the anti-American feeling is very high in Pakistan. The way the top brass are able to justify is because we're economically weak, because America's too strong, we've got no choice. Yep. And remember, life for your average Pakistani, this is a country where the last time I checked, 80% of the population earns less than $10 a day. That's the life for your average Pakistani. And that's why economic arguments, even now, there's a lot of talk about connectivity, Central Asia, Afghanistan, Pakistan. Again, it's an economic argument. This was the argument General Zia developed back in the day, but he actually believed in it. He believed these are our brothers as well, and this region should be one. So you've got all these different factions, but yeah, you've got a clear hierarchy, which is not what you normally see in other nations. But a lot of that has been due to the failure of the civilian politicians. And unfortunately, civilian politicians all want to get into power in order to take advantage of the state and fill their pockets. Benazir Bhutto and Nawaz Sharif constantly have got done for, in fact, I think Benazir Bhutto and Nawaz Sharif have never completed a term because they've got done for corruption. And that's really the hierarchy in short.
It's that wonderful revolving door of corruption where they walk in, they walk out, and then they walk right back in.
So even Imran Khan's regime, for example, the majority of his cabinet are all those individuals that have been around for the last 2 decades, and they've been part of the different governments. And Pakistan is unique where you can be in the government for 20 years, but you're part of different political parties throughout that period. It's not like in the West, for example.
Portfolios from
wonderfully convenient.
From education
like
to foreign minister to health minister, they just keep rotating.
Exactly. So it's not like in the US, you're a Democratic Party and you stay there for all your life. The way it works in Pakistan is that seat in that area belongs to you. And who's going to be in power now? Who's in a more positive light? I'll join them. So many of them joined Imran Khan's party. But most of these people who joined Imran Khan's party, these are former PPP individuals. These are former Muslim League individuals. And what you see once, Imran Khan's popularity is on the downer anyway, you see them jumping ship very soon as well. So what that means is no one is really in government or how are you going to make long-term policy when really you don't look beyond the election cycle? And even when you do get in, you're looking to fill your pockets.
And then you just get bogged down and not much comes out of it.
Yeah, I think
so. The only institution that seems to continue is the military. The politicians come and go. The military continues.
Hashmat?
Yeah, brother.
Absolutely. You're right, and I completely really love the analysis and the breakdown that Adnan did about the way Pakistan politics is structured. And I think that ISI or the military would have no intention of changing that dichotomy. They would love to keep it because, again, there's an internal double game. They can tell the Americans, look, I have a huge religious population. If you don't let me do certain things my way, they are coming to power. They've got all these Islamic parties. And then they can turn around to the Muslim population and say, you know what, we are weak. America is going to bomb us to zero. We have to do certain things to the year zero. So we have to do certain things to keep the Americans at bay and further our interests. That type of pragmatism exists in Pakistan, and that's due to Pakistan, though it was created in 1948, it did not come out of nothing. It had a highly educated elite that came from the British establishment of India. So they have huge experience. In Afghanistan, when they want to insult the Pakistanis, they say they are the children of Britain. That's how they look at the politicians. They say they've got the brains of the British, so therefore they can play all sorts of politics. And I apologize. I don't want to insult any of my Pakistani brothers with saying, I'm just simply relaying what some Afghans, not all of them, say. But again, I want to look at this other angle of what will happen to Taliban and how they will shape their relationship with Pakistan. Because again, it's a two-way relationship. And I totally agree that within the Taliban, there are groups who are vehemently cynical of Pakistan's intentions and policies towards Afghanistan. Remember, the Taliban moved with Pakistan for marriage of convenience. They wanted to basically come back to power, and now they are in power. Two things is going to shape Taliban's relationship with Pakistan. One is an internal factor, which is that how the Taliban are going to create an inclusive government that's going to be representatives of the Tajiks, the Uzbeks, the Hazaras, Turkmen, the Baluchis, and all others. That is absolutely paramount for Taliban. Yes, Taliban can have a government for 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, then what? Those populations are not going to sit. Once they recuperate and once they get back on their feet, they're going to start another form of opposition. What is going to be military, we have to wait and see. And the other thing is, all other ethnic groups are looking at the Taliban as the quote unquote, that's the stooges of Pakistan. Taliban have to prove to the people of Afghanistan that they have an independent foreign policy. How far are they going to have that independent foreign policy is going to, again, shape their relationship with Pakistan. Because Pakistan did not invest all this time and effort with Taliban for them to turn around and say, thank you so much, let me lock the door, and you go to your house and I go to my house. That's not going to happen. And the fact that Faiz Hamid, the Pakistani head of ISI, came to Kabul prior to Taliban announcing their government is highly symbolic. A huge diplomatic message that we are in control here. Yes, that ISI does not control every single member of the Taliban, but intelligence influence in an organization does not need to control every individual. It needs to have a threat of elimination and having a map of inside organization, knowing how power plays, and then you can physically remove somebody or you could politically influence them. And that's very much intact within the Taliban, the ISI control over Taliban.
Look, both of you have alluded to, in various ways, the sort of the Islamic sentiments, underpinnings, and everything else. And I don't want to sort of leave this discussion without exploring some of that as well, because that's obviously quite critical for us as Muslims looking on at what's going on. So I wanted to sort of ask Adnan, you mentioned that and Hashmat as well, the foundation of Pakistan was on this idea of some kind of state formation of Islam, in whichever form. And now, Pakistanis look across the border and they see the Taliban with, the Islamic symbolism, with the flags, with everything else, with the declarations, with all this kind of thing, Islamic Emirates, so on and so forth. How do you think that Islamic sentiment is coming through? I guess the question is, do the Pakistanis feel as though this is perhaps something that they can sympathize with? Is this something that they can support and maybe eventually even adopt in some kind of way? Like, there's been talk of how the Taliban's moves now will enliven and reinvigorate some of the quote-unquote fundamentalist movements and extremist movements in Pakistan who will now call for some transnational kind of agenda. What can we say about this sort of angle on the issue? Either of you would like to comment?
Okay, so interestingly, the only faction in Pakistan that's been a bit negative about this development has been the more liberal lot. And their view is this is going to embolden the extremists, the radicals inside Pakistan. Aside from that, the politicians don't want to take credit for what's happened. And obviously in Pakistani society, they've always viewed the Taliban as a legitimate resistant movement, foreign invasions. Many Pakistanis, in fact, most Pakistanis are anti-American, and they saw, the resistance in Afghanistan as legitimate, and they supported it. The interesting thing is with Pakistan, and when they look at Afghanistan, is that border, the Duran line, although they view themselves as brothers, that Duran line for a lot of people is there, which is quite interesting, but it was drawn by the British. So General Zia, when he was around, there was talk of, that Duran line is just there in theory, we're brothers. The issue obviously you've got is interestingly, even the Taliban, even they have, the Pakistanis always push that Duran line's there, that's the border. From the Afghanistan side, they view that border should have been well inside Pakistan. In fact, Balochistan and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, these should be really part of Pakistan.
There's some ethnic sort of arguments for that as well, isn't there?
Yeah, the issue you've got is the Taliban. They've never presented themselves as, although they espouse Islam, they've never really presented anything that goes beyond Afghanistan. So, for example, there's been nothing from them that forget that border. We're one nation, we're one people. Even intellectually, even though you don't do anything physically, they've always been where a Pashtun movement, we're fighting against resistance, has never been beyond that. But what's interesting is the borders of Pakistan on both sides were drawn by the British.
Adnan, I think there's a quick fix to that. If we just extend the Durand line to include Pakistan and Bangladesh and
then just keep on going and going and going.
Yeah, but remember that
Yeah,
So-
I mean, sorry, Adnan, I think you're not finished. If you want to finish.
No, go for it. Go for it. You go for it.
So yes, the Duran line is a very controversial line in the. That's why we call it.
Who would have known that
line.
lines on a map could be controversial?
Exactly, absolutely. Some call it line, some call it border, and how you refer to it in itself is political and sensitive. The idea from a Pashtun perspective would have been that since we are not really absolute majority in Afghanistan, we need our brethren on the other side of the border to join us. So fight they can leave. We've got 38 million Pashtuns in Pakistan. And if you join 38 million Pashtuns in Pakistan with their territories, then we are absolute majority in Afghanistan. Now, from the Tajik perspective is that the Pakistani establishment, especially the Punjab mindset, would be that, yes, if the Pashtuns would like to go to Afghanistan, they're welcome, but they're not going to take the land because we're already short of land. So if there's a migration, if they're going to move northwards or westwards, it's absolutely fine with them. The Taliban up to now have been silent about the issue of Diran because for them they have easy access across the border, although as we know thousands of that kilometer of that road, thousands of kilometers of that line or border have now barbed wired and fenced and has become a hard border. An alliance between Afghanistan and Pakistan in the 80s, if you Google and you search for this word Islamistan, this idea was floated that maybe there should be a confederation between Afghanistan and Pakistan called Islamistan. And that goes with the sentiment of Muslims on both sides, thinking that both nations need each other. One needs strategic depth, and the other one needs access to the warm waters or access to the outside world. But once you do that in an area that you've got two strong states, back then it was the Dawood Khan government, and on the other side you've got the Ziaul-Haq government. But while Pakistan government has always been Islamic orientated, Afghanistan governments have always been looking towards the West. They've always been looking towards either Moscow or Washington. And that goes to our question that who are unhappy in Pakistan? The liberals of Afghanistan and Pakistan are very unhappy because they want to create a nation from an ideological perspective, which is a modernist, and they want government. They want to move towards Western liberalism. That's why democracy. They couldn't. I mean, the number of times democracy has been mentioned in Afghanistan, I don't think has ever been mentioned in the U.S. history. I mean, everybody talks about democracy, and they really don't know. But then when you go to villages and talk about democracy, elder villagers look at you that is it some sort of a food that I can eat? Because they're hungry. I mean, they're not really, what's democracy? You have to sit down and explain to them what it is. And they say, no, thank you.
It's interesting you say that. Even the media currently in Pakistan, it's a spectacle to behold. If you look at liberal media, the way that the Taliban have come to power, they've lost the marbles. They're saying, I don't know. We don't know what Taliban will do. We don't know about their capability. We just don't know what's going on. You know, they've lost their marbles completely because it's not worked out in the way that the liberal project would have liked for it to work out.
Absolutely. I worked in journalism for 19 years in the heart of news. Yeah, I've worked with many news organizations, and some of them even for Channel 9 Australia with 60 Minutes. Not most, all, or I could say 99.9% of the journalists are liberal-minded.
Yeah.
And the job of journalism is to mediate reality. But when they mediate the reality, they do it in the image of liberalism. Yes. So therefore, what they produce is skewed. It is incorrect of the reality.
It's got their ideological tinge on it.
It has an ideological tint. There's selectivity in news, and with that selectivity, what happens is that they give the wrong image. Policymakers thinking that this is, or not thinking, believing that what's there is true reality of that country, they enact policies on that. Those policies fail, then they wonder why everything failed. It's because your very initial glasses, the lens through which you look at the country was liberalism.
Yeah.
And that's why they're baffled in a sense. That why? Because the liberals believe that their ideology is a natural state of human beings. So therefore, they don't even need to explain why you have to
justify.
They don't need to justify
it. They push it as given. There's a givenness to it. this is how reality is. You are on the periphery, we are in the center. But that's not the reality in Afghanistan. The reality in Afghanistan is that Islam is in the center, and the reality in Pakistan is that Islam is in the center. So it is very interesting to see how this is going to play out in the long run. But very quick capping, there are many layers of war in the region. Is Afghanistan going to be built in the image of Tajiks, or is it going to be built in the image of Pashtuns, or is it going to be a multi-ethnic polar nation, multi-ethnic polar, not a single polar? Then is it going to be Hanafi, or is it going to be Salafi? Is it going to be Shia, or is it going to be Sunni? Is it going to be pro-India, or is it going to be pro-Pakistan? What's its relationship with former Russian states, and what's its relationship with the Arab world? And then at the higher level, is it going to be in the left of the world's politics or in the right of the world's politics? Or is it going to have carved its own space as an independent ideology or thinking of Islam? These are all layers of conflict that makes this conflict extremely dynamic, perplexing, and to some people confusing. That's why political parties love to simplify everything between Islam and Kufr, Muslim, non-Muslim, good and bad, a terrorist, not terrorist, you're with us, you're against us. And that has failed. That simplification of the conflict has failed.
Yeah. Hashmat, if I can get, Adnan, I'll get your thoughts on it in a second, but I was interested in asking Hashmat, you talk about the image in which Taliban will sort of re-enliven itself, bring itself back to life. Which image will it be? What will it look like? I think one of the, to address the immediate concerns of the podcast as well, one of those immediate concerns is if we say what we've said about Pakistan, and we've spoken about its top brass, we're talking about the rest of the military and the public and so forth. We said in the promotional video for this, and that's the reality of it, that Pakistan has not been able to frame a policy independent of American directives for the last 4 decades or so, barring 1 or 2 completely negligible anomalies to that. It's been in American quarters through and through. My question is, given that that's the case of the top brass of Pakistan, given their significance, which we've admitted is to be reckoned with, how can the Taliban escape Pakistan's grip if it wants to imagine itself in any which way, hopefully in an Islamic way? But how can it actually escape Pakistan's grip in your
I think, in my opinion, Taliban can escape Pakistan grip by playing the same double game or playing the multiple game. They have a very strong, unsatisfied Tajik population. If they can tap into that sentiment and not destroy it completely and use it for its foreign policy advantage and use the Hazara in their foreign policy towards Iran and Pakistan, and then move towards, in its foreign policy economically, again, from Pakistan border to the northern border of Afghanistan, which is with the former Soviet states, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, there's not much for Pakistan. Pakistan has to look beyond that. To look beyond that, that gives the Taliban advantage. So, and again, I think the Taliban are also going to use the existence of the Islamic State or Daesh to their advantage, in the same way that Pakistan used those the Lashkar-e-Taiba and others in its foreign as a factor in its foreign policy. You see, when a child is weak, what is its biggest asset? Crying, annoying the mother until it gets what it wants. Weakness sometimes is also a power, is a benefit to you. So to say that, look, I'm a nation just rising, I am weak, I cannot control everybody, I need room to play. At the same time, allow those forces inside the country to shape its the dynamics of the society. It's going to give the Taliban room to play with Pakistan. But I don't think in any near future the Taliban are in a position or willing to so quickly win themselves off Pakistan. Remember, as we said in the beginning, the West is going to satisfy its population. The West is going to use sanctions, economic pressure on the Taliban, and Taliban know that. Taliban right now desperately need cash. Okay, you've got the government. Yes, you're in power. What next? This what next is the most fundamental question The Taliban have to come with an answer. Now, Pakistan is not in a position to financially support the Taliban. Pakistan is in a position to mediate financial solutions for the Taliban. And that's where Qatar comes in. You see, we've talked about Pakistan, but now Qatar is the only country that fully, other than Pakistan, supported the Taliban, and Saudis are not happy about Qatari success. I mean, this is a huge success for Qatari diplomacy, in a sense, especially in the eyes of the many Muslims as well, who are looking things through the prism of just the emotion of religion, not the deep politics of religion.
I think Turkey has spoken about diplomatic ties with the Taliban.
Turkey as well.
Turkey has spoken. Germany officials visited Pakistan, same as UK. Italy is next to come and, through Pakistan, mediate a relationship with Taliban. Taliban do want relationship with America, Europe, the whole world. Taliban wants the entire package, but that package is going to come through Pakistan. And until certain things are not, ink is not put to paper in the relationship between Pakistan and Taliban, Pakistan is going to hold those leashes. Remember, we said Afghans by nature, whether they're Tajiks, Pashtun, Uzbek, Hazara, this region by nature, throughout history, has developed a core independence to themselves. Yes, alliances are made. You see, weapons didn't grow in our mountains. We didn't have weapons on trees growing. People say, just before we said, America supported and funded Afghanistan's war. Saudi Arabia supported Afghanistan's war against the Soviets. So if you look at it, the people of Afghanistan, with empty hands, used American weapons, used the world's weapons to carve up a space for themselves. Who used who at the end of the day? You know, when you come with no money into the market and then you turn up to end up becoming a shareholder in the market, means that doesn't matter who financed you. You played that politics to be sitting at the table. So, and that independence is going to be the factor that's going to undo the Taliban internally.
Jazakallah khair, Adnan. Sorry, you've been very patient. I do have I do have something to pick your brain on that I've been meaning to ask as well. The region seems, based on the rhetoric of the Central Asian Summit of last month or the month before, seems to be moving away from the geosecurity concerns to this geoeconomic concerns of connectivity with Central Asia and so forth. How will, do you think Pakistan involve, or whether Pakistan involves them or not, how do you think the Taliban, as the representative leadership of Afghanistan, will be a part of that picture? And of course, the question of Pakistan sort of involving them within that picture of connectivity, is there a real chance for Afghanistan to rely on its own rice fields, to rely on its own crops, to build that economy, to be a part of that picture of connectivity, and to grow on that basis, do you think?
So interestingly, this talk of connectivity all started once the peace deal was agreed between the US and the Taliban. And since then, the Pakistani establishment has held lots of conferences and they're really excited about connectivity. So it all starts once the peace deal was done. So we're talking about Central Asia, we're talking about Afghanistan, we're talking about Pakistan. And some of this goes back to the 90s of, you know, the whole pipelines from Central Asia, they go through Afghanistan, Pakistan onto the ocean. So this is what the Pakistani establishment have now been selling, that connectivity. Let's move away from security to geoeconomics.
Yep.
And obviously, because of the state of Pakistan's economy, that's an easy sell to the people. And now that the Taliban have come in power, it's a double success for Pakistan. You've got a friendly government, you kicked India out. That's how they're actually selling it, yeah? I think with connectivity, we're just going to be careful because this is the same thing they used to talk about Turkey, you know, in between oil producers, oil consumers. The thing is, if you're just a roundabout where other countries go through, you're not going to make much money. What are you selling or what are you buying? Right. So if you're just going to collect taxes and tariffs from oil that's going to go through you, that's not going to really help develop your country. It's been about 5 to 8 years now of the corridor they've got with China. And there's been some fixing of roads, there's been some development, but it's not had a knock-on effect on the Pakistan economy. So that route can just
That
become
part of the BRI project you're talking about there?
Yeah, so they call it CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. And we've had a number of these projects globally where the countries that are the road route, they don't really do, unless you're exporting or importing, you're physically buying or selling, you're just a route. So Pakistan is going to be careful here that, we've seen other countries, they've not actually benefited, but the Pakistani establishment are really excited about connectivity. And it's interestingly, the neocon dream in America has been, they want to connect Central Asia to South Asia rather than the Russians get their hands on it. So remember, for long, Central Asia was behind the Iron Curtain. In 1991, all that, I think Dick Cheney, I remember calling it the next Middle East, Central Asia. The problem was throughout the 90s, you had a civil war going on in Afghanistan. So when the Taliban took over in the 1996, I think it was, the Americans effectively accepted it, because you've got one regime, now you can build the pipelines. But the Taliban, they dragged their feet. They started talking to other potential investors. Interestingly, regime change in Afghanistan was on the cards from the late 1990s. 9/11 became the pretext in the end. Yeah. So this connectivity, there's a lot of excitement. However, there's been a number of projects historically that have been proposed that have never seen the light of the day. So the thing here is, you're right, from Afghanistan's perspective, you're going to have to import-export to some degree. Afghanistan's landlocked. Interestingly, Afghanistan's surrounded by important countries, important regions, and that's why Afghanistan historically has been important. Your Central Asia's right there, South Asia's right there, the Middle East is next door. That's why everybody always wants to get their hands on Afghanistan. It is a strategic piece of real estate, if you could call it that. And that's why, last 40 years, effectively, the Afghans have been at war. It was the Soviets, it was the Americans. So there is economic potential. The interesting thing here is there's an added factor that wasn't there before, which is China. And Central Asia is key for China's Belt and Road Initiative. This Pakistan, Afghanistan, Central Asia connectivity, it goes counter to China's project. And you can see the future competition is starting to take shape now. In effect, what Pakistan seems to be saying is, despite our relationship with China, we're more excited and interested in this north to south connectivity project. And Central Asia is key really for China. That BRA project, Central Asia, is absolutely key. So you can see where this is going. You got two opposing projects, two opposing visions really of that region. And I think, whoever rules in Afghanistan, Pakistan, what side are you going to be on? Are you going to join one of the global players, or are you actually going to take care of your own interests and actually do things which will benefit you going forward? If that is the case, then there needs to Pakistan and Afghanistan need to work together, rather than America throws a project out, Pakistan jumps on board, and it gets really excited. All I would say, with these big projects, we've been here before. A number of these have been proposed and they've not materialized. Yep. And in fact, we saw after the Soviets departed, America effectively looked the other way. Yeah. So there's economic potential. I think the Taliban's major challenge now is what you can do. You're in government now. You've done the hard bit. Now you've got to run the country, and
now you got to do the harder bit.
I think the Taliban they went to the central bank and they had to be told that the physical cash doesn't exist. Yes. They went there asking, "Where's the 10 billion in reserves?" Yeah, and they had to be informed, no, the reserves are actually the form of bonds and debt sitting in America. So I don't know. They could potentially introduce their own currency. So these are the things they're going to really have to get their teeth into now, because, it took, if I remember, Mohammed Mursi, it took 1 year for everyone to work out, these guys can't run the economy. You're not going to get long. You're in power now. You've shown the Afghan people you rule the country. You've more or less defeated all the opposition. So now you have to rule. So, economic, security, you've got the social areas. They're going to really have to go. What's interesting this time around, I felt with the Taliban, they were quite isolationist previously. They're throwing out everything. They speak to the Chinese, the Russians, the Americans. I think
their spokespeople are very available, commenting everywhere. Anyone can get in touch, having the press conferences.
They're doing press conferences now. Would it be interesting if they had a woman doing a press conference? But that's another discussion in itself. But no, it's been interesting. It's been quite different this time around. However, at some point, the rhetoric has to give way to reality. I think just the other day they said China is going to be the principal partner. Now, that's probably more rhetoric than reality, but at some point, you're going to have to start delivering. This is not like the Western world where you have goodwill for about 3 months, 100 days. So they've got significant challenges coming up. And this is where you know, your relationships, your political plan. I mean, just the delay in announcing the government is not a good sign. We'll have to see how it plays out.
Hashmat, I think, has been waiting to comment on something. So let's hear it. Yep.
Yeah, that's good. I'm going to say a slightly different take on this with the China-Taliban relationship and the economic issue. According to World Bank, 60% of Afghanistan's economy is rural dependent and subsistent farming. The economy in the cities was basically a consumer economy based on occupation and military bases and basically jobs from the government. I think Taliban are going to create a much smaller government, not too big a government. And they're going to have an austerity plan. And I think that with the experience of China, with national projects and developing the agriculture sector, now the Taliban inherited something bigger than money, some of the water dams that they've got, the dams that they've got throughout Afghanistan, about 2 or 3 of them that have been built, that is going to, or has the ability to produce enormous amount of, or let's say a good amount of agricultural produce. With the Chinese expertise in that field, and Afghanistan traditionally being an agricultural society, Taliban can manage through a very wide communistic, like the time of the Soviets or Chinese, national projects of producing food. They can keep majority of the population happy and move to that direction.
Yep.
I think that's something Pakistan would like to have. They do not want Afghanistan to become industrialized. Industrialization of Afghanistan, the neighboring countries see that as dangerous. Because remember, in the psyche of the Afghans, they were an empire once. Afghanistan feels like the Germany of Central Asia before the First World and Second World War. And there will come a time when this country will bounce back. Yes, Afghanistan is seen as a real estate, but it's not a real estate for grab, by anybody. It's a real estate with owners. Absolutely. And those owners are going to one day unify around a common view of themselves and solve their problems and probably create problems for the neighbors. And that's why a lot of neighbors do not want Afghanistan to be industrialized. I believe that it's going to move more towards, yes, it's going to move towards China. China does not want Afghanistan to fail. And that dovetails into how the Taliban can break away from Pakistan is through heavily relying in the initial stages towards China.
And there have been statements and sentiments linking that as well.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the embassies in Kabul is a Chinese that is still operating. Sorry, go ahead.
Absolutely. But that's going to dent the image of the Taliban as an Islamic movement that is fighting for the sake of Islam and Muslims, with the Uyghur Muslims of China being persecuted. That's the hard sell that the Taliban have to do to the majority of the Muslims around the world who are basically supporting the Taliban or have sentiments towards the Taliban. So being in government has brought a lot of challenges to the Taliban. Yep. And sooner or later, they have to move from slogan to hard, at times double, and at times dirty politics. This is the future for the Taliban, and let's see how they're going to play that. But the most important thing is they've got to keep the house in order. That is to bring the Tajiks, to bring the Uzbeks and the Hazaras together. About the gas pipeline, I just want to make that last comment. When the oil gas pipeline was proposed to be built from Turkmenistan through to Pakistan, Ahmad Shah Massoud back then said, without us, that pipeline is going to be a holy pipeline. We're going to blow it up here now and then. That's quite possible. These projects can still be sabotaged by forces inside Afghanistan. You see, the Americans came, displaced the Taliban. They did not defeat the Taliban. The defeat was not ideological. It was just they took ground. The Taliban now defeated Panjshir Valley, let's say the Northern Alliance or the Tajiks predominantly. But that defeat is a geographical defeat, military defeat. It is not an ideological defeat. It's not a defeat of claim. They are going to continue with a huge expat population outside, some of them very vengeful. Any future government must somehow reach a compromise and be inclusive for Afghanistan to move forward. And I think Pakistan realizes that.
Thank you very much. I want to put a, I don't know if I want to say, I don't want to say final. I always hate saying final because that's very exclusive to Hamza. I think Hamza might want to add some thoughts to this. But penultimate question to both of you. My question is this. I know I was speaking earlier about, breaking away from Pakistan's tight grip. But at the end of the day, it's that double game. Like, you don't want to break away. You want to break away from the top brass, and you don't want to break away from connectivity and connecting with Pakistan, right, in the long run. My question is this. A player in the geopolitical framework in the world is as strong as they think of themselves, right? If Afghanistan and the Taliban as the representative leadership of Afghanistan comes out and continues some of the language which I'm a little bit critical of, some of the language around seeking recognition from the international community and appeasing them regarding the treatment of women and so forth. I think it's about positioning. Like, if Afghanistan comes out, do you feel that there is an important step that Afghanistan needs to take in dictating how it would like to be positioned? In saying it doesn't need to wait for Pakistan to talk about connectivity. It doesn't need wait for Central Asia to say you're part of the picture. It can come out itself and say that we have a long-term vision of connectivity with Central Asia, with Pakistan, and have the kind of not just language, but literally the way that the Central Asian leaders and Pakistan's Imran Khan walks into the summit. Taliban should walk into the summit when it's next invited and say, that these are our future goals of connectivity. We do see a future with Central Asia. If cooperation exists, we do see a future with Pakistan. Do you feel that language and that vision towards connectivity should come forth from the Taliban itself? Adnan?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, unfortunately, that's what's really been missing. Obviously, it's only been a couple of weeks. There's only so much the Taliban can do physically. What you can do is intellectually put out your positions. Yeah, I think we're just going to be, obviously, we've got to take into account, the Taliban have been at war for the best part of 40 years. Their vision for the moment is domestic inside Afghanistan, and that's understandable. They've been at war. They defeated two empires. You can lay claim to that. But there needs to be some red lines. There's got to be some fixed principles which people can judge them by and which they will proceed by. Yeah. So, for example, they've got a lot of goodwill inside Pakistan from the people. They should be reaching out to the people. Absolutely. In fact, where the regime or the establishment play the double game, they should just be in Pakistan. They've got a lot of goodwill. For a long time, as far as people in Pakistan were concerned, that border's not there. These are our people, and in fact, a lot of money was raised inside Pakistan. That's what they need to do. Obviously, look, we've got to be practical here, which is, look, the Taliban are not a group like that. And if you just look at their history, they're a resistance guerrilla movement fighting against empires, and that's what they've been doing. Now, obviously, they need to transition. Yeah, they need to transition from being a guerrilla movement to a political player. So they've got their domestic audience, which Hashmit's mentioned a lot about. They're going to have to deal with that. It'd be interesting if they were to actually give some of the positions to their opposition. How would that deal with the unity inside the country? Then, at the moment, internationally, they just need to put out their positions. Obviously, for that, they need to understand the international system, the players, and how you get around that. I mean, interestingly, there's been a lot of talk in the West that the Taliban are going to start targeting the opposition. They're going to start carrying out assassinations. This is coming from the side of the world that set up Guantanamo Bay, that went after all the individuals that they've removed. So there's a lot of, so they can play the ideological game by exposing the West and their values. What do they stand for? In the West, they've got question marks about their values. The wealth divide, democracy is, rock bottom at the moment. But obviously, Taliban don't have this vision. The fact that they're calling someone emirate and not a caliphate is that a caliphate has a global vision. It's looking to expand intellectually, physically in the long run. That's not the Taliban goals. And that's not because they're insincere. That's because look at where they've come from. They've come from madrasas and they've been at war for 40 years. You know, for them, this is the culmination of a long struggle. However, they've got the goodwill, not just across the border, across the Muslim world. They should be reaching out to the Muslim world. And everyone gets it at the moment, you know, physically, they can't do much. They've got to sort out the domestic situation. But intellectually, they can be putting out actually a lot. What's your long-term view on America and the system America stands for? That system's crumbling. In fact, the Taliban, Afghanistan's had a more smoother transfer in government than America had recently. Yeah. So a lot of this stuff they can do, but the reason why they don't do it is not because they're insincere. A lot of it, they don't know these sort of things. I'm
just saying, honestly, I don't speak on behalf of Pakistan. I barely speak on behalf of Mount Druitt, which is where I live. But Hashmat, the reason I say it is because we've got a public in Pakistan which craves for that kind of wherever that form of sincere Islamic leadership rises, and now it's in their backyard, they crave for that kind of commentary and intellectual leadership that America should sit quietly while we run the show in Afghanistan now.
Yeah, the Taliban is not your traditional political party that came into the Muslim world as a culture from Europe. Taliban is more of a spiritual, tribal, loose movement of various factions. Sure. You see within the Taliban a group that is close to Haqqani with much more Salafi movement ideas. Yeah. Then recently we saw videos of some Taliban or some pro-Taliban mullahs are saying that this government is going to uproot the Salafis out of Afghanistan. In fact, a very prominent Salafi scholar just yesterday, him and his brother, Ubaidullah Mutawakkil, who was in prison during the time of Ghani, was taken by neighbors saying Taliban, people dressed like Taliban, or the people said they are Taliban who came and took them. A few days later, they were found beheaded and their bodies have been destroyed with acid. This is a very prominent Salafi scholar. So again, the Taliban have something inside to sort out. Are they going to be a Sufi movement, a Salafi movement, or Deobandi movement, Hanafi movement? What are they going to be? The top of Islam that the rest of the Muslim world has come to aspire, that is an inclusive Islam of all madhahib, all the schools of thoughts and ideas, but under a single leadership that draws inspiration from Islam, not from Westernism or liberalism, not from the right of Western thoughts, not from the left of Western thoughts, not from modernity. People are looking for a theory of social order that is extracted from the values of Islam. Do the Taliban have the intellectual capacity, the scholars, to do that? I personally doubt that. I personally doubt that. We have not seen anything like that from the Taliban. At the local level, yes, I have seen a number of Taliban, again, I say this reservedly, please don't read into it too much. I have seen a number of Taliban who are Tajik ethnic group or Uzbek and speak Persian. They've articulated in their interviews and in their ideas a very fascinating view of society and how they want to move forward. But among the core of the Taliban movement, we have not seen an intellectual theory of social order based on Islam. So it is expected from a tribal movement that, as we said, has been in war at least for the last 20 years or 30 years, if you said from 94 or whichever way you take the date the Taliban were created. Yeah, I think that there are a lot of gaps in the Taliban's theory of governance. But what works in their favor, the fact that they have not called a republic, or they have not called a Westminster system of government that can be judged by the Western philosophers of politics and the social theories and governments. They're calling it Khilafah. Sorry, they're calling it Emirate of Taliban, Emirat of Taliban, and they're going to invent it as they go. And you cannot hold them to task, oh, this system is not working, because everything is new. As they move forward, they invent the posts, and they're going to create a dichotomy between this spiritual leader, which is Hibbatullah, and then, or Haybatullah, and the governance itself. That dichotomy is interesting to see how it's going to play out. Some people said it's going to be more like the Iranian spiritual leader of Walayat al-Faqih and the government. But as you know, the Taliban and Afghanistan predominantly Sunni, Walayat al-Faqih in the psyche and the theory of governments in the mind of the Shia has religious authority that cannot be challenged. But in the Sunni political thought, the Khalifa, the Amir al-Mu'mineen, everyone can be challenged by the scholars. You don't have to use them as your marja' taqlid or the point of reference that you have to follow, that you're religiously obliged to follow. That doesn't exist within the Taliban. I'll leave it at that. I think there's a lot of questions than answers in this.
Very interesting and insightful
Jazakallah
commentary.
khair. Sufyan did say that it was the penultimate. Look, I don't have a question because what you guys said covered what I was going to ask, which was, is there room for some kind of genuine Islamic project? And I think both of you guys, mashallah, have articulated your positions quite strongly on that. So I think that's a great point to leave it at. But I guess my one contribution to that is, you know, it signals perhaps a need for the Taliban, as well as the other sincere Islamic groups and movements, you know, the goodwill that's been established around the world, to have some kind of dialogue, perhaps some kind of interaction where, you know, as Brother Hashmat said, if the Taliban perhaps aren't looking in that direction, maybe others can point that way. And Allahu Alam, maybe in the long term, there's something that can come out of the emirate to the caliphate, whatever it might be. And as Muslims, we've all got a vested interest in seeing genuine and sincere Islamic leadership. And inshallah, if there's some good to come out of this movement with the Taliban and everything that's happening, then so be it, and Allah is the best of planners. But yeah, that's I think we've gone well over our time, but that's all right. Alhamdulillah, we had a fantastic discussion. I'm sure that
this is proof that we all enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, we certainly did. We very much enjoyed it. Alhamdulillah. But I think we've taken every shred of patience now from our viewers and listeners. So Jazakallah khair for those who have battled on through this entire journey. Jazakallah khair. It has been a fantastic discussion. And I'd like to, with the greatest sincerity, thank both of our guests, Brother Adnan and Brother Hashmat, for your appearances. I know you're in different time zones, and I don't know what strange hour of the night you might have had to get up to do this, but Jazakallah khair. Thank you very, very much. It's been fantastic to have you guys on. And we really thank you. Thank you so much.
Also wanted to personally thank them as well. I think one of our guests actually changed his flight to be able to make this podcast. And the other one's been so extremely flexible with his schedule. MashaAllah, I really appreciate the flexibility that you guys have shown.
All I had to do was go upstairs.
Yeah. Alhamdulillah. So inshallah, our viewers, we hope that you enjoyed the conversation and learned a lot, as we did. We are obviously on Facebook, on Instagram. We hope that you can click like and share these kinds of videos with your friends and your contacts if you find them useful, as we pray you do. We will end it on that note, inshallah. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم فاستغفروا إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.